All right, everybody. I've had already recorded these videos, and I'm still having some problems with my photo booth. Didn't have any sound whatsoever, so I'm gonna make this into a couple of short parts instead of running it too long, and so see if I can at least get some of what I want to say on here for you. But the main point. Is I wanted to talk about our chapter on the world systems theory. I wrote my master's thesis. I spent 2 years working on the literature on world systems theory, so I feel I have some expertise on that theory. Um, but as you see in your text, a lot of Wallerstein, Manuel Wallerstein, his work comes out from many other predecessors that were working in this vein of looking at the basically the unequal relationship between the core wealthy countries and the poor peripheral nation states, say, of Latin America, South America, Africa. And the explanation was it's a social inequality theory, and that there's vast social inequalities between the wealthy states and the peripheral states. And, the modernization theorists always said that these poor peripheral countries simply did not have the value system of Western society, did not have the rational, technological, scientific capabilities of developing as quickly or laxed into stagnation, while Western European and American societies advanced in their stages of development. Which is quite biased from the world systems theory point of view. So the world system grew out of this social inequality between the wealthy countries and the poor countries of the world, Wallerstein attempted to rewrite history by trying to show his major thesis was that the core nation states that we see today, the wealthiest countries, that they developed their wealth and opulence and their technology. All of the commodities that we have came from the exploitation of these peripheral countries for their raw materials. So the thesis is that our development is the name that the short-term term is the development of underdevelopment. That our development came directly related to the underdevelopment, that is, the exploitation of these poor regions of the world for their raw materials. So basically, a notion of unequal trade relations, where the periphery was exploited for usually their monocrops and other types of raw materials, minerals. They became poor countries because of this situation. Many of these regions historically were actually developing along quite well. For example, in Africa, many of the earlier like Timbuktu used to be seen as a world cultural and social and economic city in Africa. And however, with colonialism, these countries were placed under colonial rule. And then, with the Atlantic slave trade, these societies became underdeveloped and kept as dependencies on the wealthier European and later the United States. So the thesis is about this interrelationship between the haves and have-nots on a world scale. So if you look at the chapter, you see that they start out by talking about Karl Marx. Marx had what we would call an internal class theory about class relations around in a capitalist economy within a nation state. And for the most part, a lot of Marx's early theories were focused on England and the industrialization of England. Wallerstein simply took Marx's class structure between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and placed that on a worldwide scale, so that now we're not talking about internal classes of people, but of actual nation states. Those that at the core would be considered the bourgeois countries, or the owners of capital, the factories, the investment organizations, the mighty military organizations, much more social and economic development in terms of, say, commodity access, and whereas the periphery have been the sort of seen as the working class of the world system, and they've been exploited for basically for their labor and for their raw materials, and kept under tutelage of the core countries up to the present. Another important aspect of world systems theory, it's quite simple. Really, you have this three-tier: the core countries, the periphery, and the semi-periphery. Semi-periphery is this in-between countries that are on the move. They maybe at one time were peripheral. Now they've become much more industrialized. China used to be a semi-periphery, though it's certainly moving into core nowadays and becoming a competitor with the United States, as the United States seems to be declining somewhat from a world systems perspective in terms of its hegemonic position in the world system. But anyway, the semi-periphery sort of sits in between the periphery. It's not really a poor country, but it's industrialized. Most of its industrialization has come from the outside, however, and it still exports. A lot of these companies, for example, in China, are from the United States and other core countries that have gone there, particularly from a world systems perspective, for cheap labor. And then there's the money the profits that are made go back to those corporations and generally end up back in the core countries themselves. But even as we speak, China is certainly moving into the core, as a core country and a competitor among the core nation state, vying for hegemonic control. That is, among the core countries, there's always this moving in and out of the hegemonic country. That is the most powerful country in terms of all the world's nation states. And they've been interchangeable. In 1900, that would have been England. Today, up from World War II until now, it's been the United States. There are many world system theorists, from their perspective, see the United States as declining in its hegemony, especially its economic, as the dollar's been devalued, and with all the problems we see in terms of the world economy today. I'm going to stop there and see how this works out, and then I'll come right back with a part 2.